Okay, now let's take a look at how to model the other piece to the side arm, and we'll move on to the cushions. So let's look at our references. You can see that I'm not really totally clear what this shape looks like. It looks like maybe it gets a little bit thicker or wider potentially. The lighting doesn't really help us too much in this photo. It's basically a rectangle that's been extruded, so this one should go fairly quickly. The first thing we want to do is to add a cube. Back in Blender, let's just do Shift A to bring up the add panel, mesh, and then cube. All right, press S to scale this down. S, constrain it to Y to scale it up. And we'll jump back into our orthogonal view and turn on X-ray. Be careful not to create this cube while in edit mode, or you will be adding the cube to this other mesh. If it helps, you can actually disable the visibility of that mesh altogether by clicking on the I button there. Let's tab into here, and just like we did on the other one, we're just going to get this shape in place. This is supposed to be an object that's flattened, so we want to model it flat. We don't want to sort of model it at an angle like that. So keep that in mind. You want to model it in an ideal form, and then you can rotate it into position later. I think we have some thickness here and here, so let's press Ctrl R. I'm going to add a couple edge loops. Looks like we're a little bit high, so let's bring the thickness down. You know, if we want, we can rotate this object back. I think we don't really need to do that, but I think I've locked rotation here. Let's turn that off. And we're going to disable that, and let's just move this up. So tab back in. There's really not much to this shape. We're just making sort of a smoothed cube that's been stretched and has some nicer corners on it. So let's turn visibility of our other piece on here. We can just eyeball the position here, or we can kind of jump into this view. Scale that in the X direction. So I think it just pops out a little bit on each side. This doesn't have to be exact. This looks pretty close to me. So let's turn off this one. And the easiest thing we can do to get that shape the way we want it is to add some control edges here. Let's actually add two to each face. So I'm going to press S and then X to scale this up. Okay. Control R. And we're going to do S and Z to scale those up. And for this one, we will just have to kind of do it manually here. So move that into place there. And add one more here. If we jump back into this view, looks like we just need to bring this down slightly. So press 1 and grab our vertices here. Just pull that down. Okay, so we're not in X-ray view, so we're not getting all the vertices. So make sure you jump back in X-ray. Grab these, pull them down. This will totally smooth this object out, and we actually need it to be a little bit tighter. So to hold this corner here, we're just going to add an edge loop. So let's just do shade smooth here. And you can see, even without adding a modifier, this looks pretty good. But we are going to go ahead and add our subdivision modifier to this object. And we're going to jump that to 3. And that looks really good. So it's a very squared shape, but we're still getting the highlight happening on this bevel, which is going to make all the difference when we go to texture and render this in the future. I think we need to maybe exaggerate this a bit more. Maybe pull this up a bit. Okay. And maybe we'll add a supporting edge. There we go. And it just kind of holds that shape a little bit better for us. That looks pretty close to me. And maybe we can just bring it up a bit. Okay, this piece is done. Remember to save. Now we are going to add these brackets. We can just add another cube, scale that down, scale on the X, get pretty thin. Y to move that back. Let's just take a look at our reference. Okay, tab into there to edit, and we'll just move these vertices around. So we're going to use the same principle that we used on the other objects, where we're going to add some edges here to tighten up these curves to hold them more square when we add our subdivision. This one we can leave totally off because, as you'll see when we add a subdivision modifier to this, let's just make that 3. You can see it's adding that curvature for us because we don't have a supporting edge holding that in place. We do need some on this dimension, however, so let's go ahead and add those. Oops, I need to, let's undo that and use the scroll wheel to get an additional scale X dimension. Okay, that looks pretty good. It may actually be a little bit thick, so I can just scale it. Oops, press A, can scale it up. That looks pretty good. Let's see. It's pretty close. Okay, that looks like a pretty good reproduction of that object. And so it's going to be on the outside here, so let's just, if we jump into Z, we can actually see it from the top. Might be a little bit easier. We don't want to go too far in, just touching like that. Just how it would be built in real life. We want to do Alt-D, because Alt-D will do the same thing as duplicate, but it will make an instance. So whenever we change one, it will change all of these brackets. So if I press S on the keyboard, X on the keyboard, it will constrain to the X axis. And there we go. That's pretty good. All right, so those brackets are done. Okay, so I'm going to turn on the other piece to see how these are fitting together. It doesn't look like they're quite lining up because I moved the reference again. You're not usually supposed to move the reference. I'm just kind of going in between positions because I need the bottom to be flat, and I know the top is supposed to be relatively flat. So what we can do is, let's just jump into this perspective here. And if this object is supposed to be rotated back a little bit, that's actually pretty easy to fix. So all we have to do is move that into place here. Oops, let's grab both brackets, jump back into view, and press G. We can sort of move that into place. And you can see that it needs to be rotated up slightly. So to do that, I have to move my pivot point over here. To do that, if we go up to options, you can click on origin. The origin is this little dot in the center. Now we can move our origin to be closer to where we want to rotate from. I have to jump out of origin mode here. Now if we press R on the keyboard, we can rotate that up a little bit. And it looks like I'm not quite forward enough. If we go to local view, it will move according to the object's local orientation and not global. And so that means I can actually move this as if I was modeling it while it was not rotated. And that just helps us keep the integrity of this object. So if we ever want to unrotate it later on, for instance, if we came back here and pressed 0 to reduce the rotation, it's still perfectly straight as if we had modeled it in this view. Okay, so we're just going to undo that. And that's pretty good. So let me just take a look, make sure that this is in position. Yeah, that looks great.